We've now entered that long stretch of Sundays after Trinity, what we call in the new lectionary, or rather new lectionary, it actually came out as the Revised Common Lectionary many years ago now, what we call ordinary time, which is an odd phrase because it's difficult to sense that any time could be ordinary under God. But we have a little phase of ordinary time between the end of the Christmas season, after the Feast of the Epiphany, and the beginning of Lent. And we have this second great swathe of ordinary time now between the celebration of the Feast of Pentecost till we eventually get to Advent. Now, in these Sundays after Trinity, you'll notice one thing in particular: the colour of the stoles or the vestments change. And we've gone, of course, into green. We wear green because it's emblematic of growth. So we use these Sundays after Trinity to grow in our Christian convictions. We've thought about the glorious story of the resurrection of Christ and his ascension in Eastertide. We've celebrated the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. We've celebrated the doctrine of the Trinity on Trinity Sunday, the only Sunday of the year that's a feast where we celebrate a doctrine. And now we're into that ordinary time, as if any time could be ordinary under God. So today we pick up particular themes for the readings that are important themes for us as Christians. And they're actually important themes for us under lockdown. They are about covenant and relationship. We see that borne out in each of the readings, which I'll unpack for you in a moment. We see it in the Gospel reading between Jesus and the disciples. And we see it, first of all, beginning to take birth in the book of Exodus. That relationship, that covenant relationship between God and his people. It's about the people of Israel, how they were God's chosen people. But that relationship, of course, was one of mutual exchange. God loved his people, and what God wanted was the obedience of his people and the ability to love him back. If you read the Old Testament and know it well, you'll know that the people of Israel were a bunch of awkward so-and-sos, as I'm sure we all are in some ways. But God yearned for that relationship with them. And we see in our salvation history the development of that relationship between the people of Israel and God, until eventually they were so disobedient, he sent a Messiah under the auspices of Christ, who came into our world to unite the whole of humanity and bring reconciliation between God and humanity. The readings today are interesting ones because relationships are endlessly interesting. Moses, whom God worked through, was by no means a perfect person, but Moses tried to get the people of Israel to be obedient, and indeed at times found that very difficult. In the letter of Paul to the Romans, we're given a wonderful reading, it could almost be chosen for lockdown, about understanding what it is to be alive, what it is to be human, what it is to have freedom of will and character. And it talks about suffering. Now, none of us willingly embraces suffering, not unless we're a bit strange or a bit perverse, but it speaks about the positive aspects of suffering, about suffering producing endurance, endurance producing character, and character producing hope, and hope does not disappoint us. Now, one of the important things in the diocesan vision we have at the moment is looking about our character as God's people. Are we prepared to embrace the challenges of the 21st century? Are we prepared to go out and to be evangelists and to be missionaries and to bring people to know the love of God? I'll leave you to answer that question for yourself. But the interesting thing that Paul talks about in this reading is hope. Now, it is not the sort of hope that is the type of hope we might think of when we say, I hope it won't rain tomorrow. It's not the sort of hope that we think of when we might say, I hope I will begin to feel better. It's a different type of hope than that. It's a type of firm assurance. Paul writes in the context of the faithfulness of God. Not in a fickle way, but in a determined way, that God will be faithful and that God's promises and assurance to us are meant, that they are sincere, that God will honour his side of the bargain. We, of course, receive God's grace. God gives that to us freely. We can't do anything to earn it. It is completely unmerited. But that grace needs a response that we might call, for want of another term, believer's hope. That firm assurance in God's promises, in the promises of the gospel. And the promises of the gospel are about transformation and change, about redeemed lives, about different situations, about the world looking a better place. And the world looks a better place if we have steady and secure relationships, not just with people who are exactly like ourselves, that they share our prejudices and our viewpoints and might have the same political view of the world or whatever, but that we have an appreciation that through the blood of Christ, all are redeemed children of God, all are given his grace, and all they need is the believer's hope. Now, in the last week or 10 days, we've had a lot of unrest, a lot of things about pulling statues down, some issues with the Black Lives Matter movement, and people protesting. But one thing that shows us is there is a lot of hurt. And there is always hurt where relationships are not what they could be. If we wish to achieve a successful outcome in this situation, it's not about whether statues should stand or whether they should fall or how we should do that. It is about different types of people coming together to discuss their commonalities and their differences. There is no quick fix solution to this. It isn't about saying we'll criminalise you if you tear a statue down, or we'll just take all the statues down to make you feel better, because that's not the solution to any problem. The solution to the problem is understanding the hurt. Now, God, in his dealing with us, seeks to understand us, and what he wants of us is to understand him through our love, through our faith, and through our devotion. And we see in the gospel reading this set out in the context of proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. Jesus summons the disciples and he sends them out. And he's very specific about the instructions that he gives them. He points out to them the richness of the harvest, the fact that there are a lack of labourers for the harvest, and he sends them out with clear instructions about casting out evil spirits, curing disease and sickness. What does Jesus send the disciples out to do? He sends them out to bring wholeness to the world. And that wholeness that the disciples were encouraged to send out into the world and to share and to spread is the same wholeness that we are given by virtue of our baptism, by virtue of our incorporation into God's kingdom, to go out and share ourselves. The instruction in Matthew's Gospel, which was of course written for a Jewish audience, is to go to the lost house of Israel, to begin first of all with the people around them who were like themselves. To begin speaking the language of salvation and redemption to people who might have lost their passion for God. If any of us lose our passion for God, we know that can be a difficult time in our lives, but we are encouraged by the scriptures. Jesus asks a lot of those disciples. They are big asks: cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. They aren't small things. They're big things that transform people's lives and bring them to healing and wholeness. Now, I'm sure not all of us can in a literal sense cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers and cast out demons. We can do that metaphorically by the way in which we live our lives. If we are children of the light, we cast out darkness. If we speak wisely and gently, we show compassion, we bring reconciliation, not because we are so good or so worthy or so great, but because we do it as children of God. May our prayer be this week that in whatever situation we find ourselves, we may have the wisdom to reflect deeply and to speak words of compassion and words of love. To God be the glory, now and forevermore.